Hey everybody, welcome to lesson 2 of learning Japanese, and congratulations on making it past part 1, I guess, but don't get cocky, that wasn't that hard of a thing to do. Today, we're moving on from the hiragana syllabary to the katakana syllabary. So, what is the deal with katakana? So basically, the two kana systems are hiragana and katakana, and while hiragana is more ingrained into the actual language as representative of Japanese itself, katakana is also Japanese, but its sole purpose is representing foreign words that Japanese imports from other languages and representing onomatopoeias. While in English, onomatopoeias aren't too big of a deal and you won't really see them anywhere other than, like, say, comic books or whatnot, in Japanese, they have a larger presence, and that topic is actually hardy enough to be its own video. So basically all you need to know about onomatopoeias right now is that they're used in normal conversation and not just in comic books, but they are used in comic books a lot, manga. But yeah, we'll leave that for another video, and they are usually in katakana, but when you're a medium used in art like manga and stuff like that, people tend to use artistic creative license or something like that, so they can also be represented by hiragana, and it's just, you know, really individual flair. But yeah, so moving on into the more important part, which is katakana for foreign words. Over its history, Japanese has adopted a lot of words from other foreign countries, and this is inclusive but not limited to German, French, Portuguese, Dutch, Chinese, etc. Most recently, a majority of the words that have been added into the Japanese language from other languages, they come from English. I don't know the specific reason for that, but that's what it is. So why does Japanese need a whole separate syllabary just to represent foreign words? Well, the answer is pretty simple. It's because the languages have different sound structures. If you remember what I said in the previous lesson about how every single character in Japanese is a consonant accompanied by a vowel, with the exception of the letter N, then you can see how that really diverges from, say, the English language, in which there can be just like a whole load of consonants in a row without any vowel sounds. My mind is blanking on an example, but hopefully you get the idea. So what katakana represents is taking these English words that would not work in the Japanese language and converting them into the sound structure of the Japanese language. And while that's a fairly simple answer to our fairly simple question, the result, or one could even say consequence of this, is that for native English speakers to say these English-derived words in Japanese, it's actually pretty tough because of the difference of what you already know it to be. Let's take the word circus, for example. In English, the word circus composes of basically 2 syllables, sir and kiss. But when we transmorgify that into the Japanese language, we have to use the Japanese sounds that resemble sir and kiss the most. And in the process of doing that, that actually changes the word into 3 syllables, in which they are sakasu. Another common distinction that you'll notice in English words and their katakanized Japanese version is that they'll be essentially an abridged version of their full form. For our example, we take the word television, which is television, basically 4 syllables. When we take this word and we transform it into the Japanese katakana version, it's simply going to be 3 syllables, and it goes terebi. And I'm not sure myself if there's a guideline Japanese katakana establishers follow to decide which ones can be shortened or whatever, or if it's just a kind of poppy culture influence from the initials TV or something like that. Just know that there's a lot of variations. While you can learn how to directly translate a word into a katakana version of it exactly, in Japanese language there are some more established versions that will seem out of ordinary. So the hiragana syllabary and the katakana syllabary are in fact different writing structures. They are actually based off of the same sound structure. So all of the letters will be pronounced the same way, they are just written differently, and in some cases some of them will look nearly identical, such as the character Ka. So in this video, I am in fact going to cover all of the characters in the katakana syllabary, but it's not going to be as in-depth as the last video. I'm simply just going to pronounce them and show them on the screen at the same time. If you would like a reference that is more intricate, then perhaps look at the last lesson, even though it shows the hiragana characters instead. The pronunciation on that video is exactly the same, and in this video you can check out the actual way they are written, match with the pronunciation. So as per the last video, I've moved to the side so that we can leave some room to show the characters as I say them, and here we go. We're gonna read all of the characters off the katakana syllabary. Starting with the vowels, we have A, I, U, E, and O. We have the K series, Ka, Ki, Ku, Ke, and Ko. We move on to the S letter. We have Sa, Shi, Su, Se, and So. We move on to the T letter. We have Ta, Chi, Su, Te, and To. We move on to the N letter. We have Na, Ni, Nu, Ne, and No. We move on to the H letter. We have Ha, Hi, Fu, He, and Ho. We move on to the M letter. We have Ma, Mi, Mu, Me, and Mo. We move on to the Y letter. We have Ya, Yu, Yo. We move on to the R letter. We have Ra, Ri, Ru, Re, and Ro. We move on to the W letter. We have Wa and O. We move on to the G letter. We have Ga, Gi, Gu, Ge, and Go. We move on to the Z letter. We have Za, Ji, Zu, Ze, and Zo. We move on to the D letter. We have Da, Ji, Zu, De, and Do. We move on to the P letter. We have Pa, Pi, Pu, Pe, and Po. We move on to the B letter. We have Ba, Bi, Bu, Be, and Bo. And now we get to the complex consonants, and we have for the K letter, we have Kya, Q, and Kyo. For the S letter, we have Sha, Shu, and Sho. For the T letter, we have Cha, Chu, and Cho. For the N letter, we have Nya, Nyu, and Nyo. For the H letter, we have Hya, Hu, and Hyo. For the M letter, we have Mya, Mu, and Myo. For the R letter, we have Rya, Ryu, and Ryo. For the G letter, we have Gya, Gyu, and Gyo. For the Z letter, we have Ja, Ju, and Jo. For the D letter, we also have Ja, Ju, and Jo. For the P letter, we have Pya, Pyu, and Pyo. And for the B letter, we have Bya, Bu, and Bio. Then, of course, we do not forget the Moraic consonant N, which is N. As a notice beforehand, I have to mention that in comparison to hiragana, katakana isn't nearly as important a syllabary that you need to know. You won't come across words written in katakana too often, and you will most likely never really come across a whole sentence written in katakana, because that's just pretty absurd. It kind of just defeats the purpose of the system itself. So anywhere you see katakana, if it's like a full-length sentence, you're bound to probably see hiragana and maybe kanji there too as well. So while you do need to know hiragana to just even get into the business of writing sentences yourself, katakana not so much. It's a hard thing for English speakers, native English speakers to grasp. In a sense, this is one of those things that you can really just take your time with, unlike the previous syllabary. So with that said, do not get frustrated if you can't translate, or you can't even keep up with why they're being translated like that for katakana, and yeah. So now that we have the sounds of the katakana characters established, we're gonna go through the general guidelines on how to basically parse English words into their katakana versions. And these guidelines are a bit particular to the English language and its sound structure, and I'm not too sure that it applies to other foreign languages like French and Portuguese and Dutch and so on, but we are just gonna have to stay limited to this one relationship between English and Japanese, I suppose. So when you're working with the sound I, as in the word pill or until or kill, when you parse that into the katakana Japanese word respectively, you're gonna change that sound to the short I in Japanese, which is pronounced I. So for example, kill will be changed to kiru, and you'll notice that the ki sound changes to ki. When we want to take the English sound A as heard in such words as male rain, or cake and change that into the katakana Japanese version of those words, we use the Japanese letter E, which is pronounced e, and we turn it into either a long vowel or we use it and succeed it with the other vowel E, which is I. And the more common transformation of these two is the long vowel e. So for example, in the word that we mentioned earlier, cake, when we change that to the katakana version, it turns simply into keiki. And this translation consists of 3 characters. First, the character ke. Secondly, the hyphen or dash resembling symbol that represents the stress in the vowel e in the character ke. And then thirdly and lastly, the character ki. So we have completely keiki. Another word that uses the same transformation is the aforementioned word male. When we turn male into the Japanese katakana version, it also consists of 3 characters written. First of all, the character me, again, the hyphen resembling symbol that represents the stress of the vowel e in the character me, and then lastly, the character ru, so meru. In contrast, we have the word rain. When we change the word rain into its Japanese katakana version, we don't give it a long e sound. Instead, we give it the e vowel, and then we succeed that vowel by a placement of the e vowel. So in its complete form, the word rain is going to consist of 3 characters also, but it's going to be re, e, and n. So rain. Next, we have the English sound e, as heard in words such as pen. When we change this to the Japanese katakana version of itself, it's one of the most simplest transformations in that it is also represented by the Japanese e, which is pronounced e as well. So pen, it's going to consist of 2 characters, simply pe and n, so pen. When we have the English sound a, as in the word attack or apple or camera, in Japanese, when we change the katakana Japanese version, it retains that same sound structure in that it's turned into camera. So we have 3 characters of that word, and the first one of course is ka, and that's and the second and the third characters that follow are me and ra. So in its complete pronunciation, we have the word camera. When we want to represent the English sound ah, as usually represented by the short o sound, but sometimes it can also be represented, it's going to be golfu. In that transformation, it retains the short pronunciation of the vowel o. So the 3 characters are just go, ru, and fu. So in total, golfu. The vowels in them are long vowels. The important one that we want to notice, of course, is the first one, because even though in English the word coffee doesn't have a stress on the o vowel, in this Japanese katakana version of it, it does. When we want to represent the English sound o, as in with a long o sound, so the word note will change to noto. Again, notice that the o in that word is a long o and not rather a short. When we change that to the Japanese katakana version of itself, we simply use a short u vowel. Notice the rather simple translation of the u just turning into a short u in Japanese too, because it is rather a direct translation. When we want to represent the English sound u, as in the word moon, we use the long u sound. So the word moon in English will be changed to the Japanese katakana version, pronounced moon. When we want to represent the English sound I, as in the word pie, in the Japanese katakana system, we simply change that to the 2 vowels a and e. So pie will turn into pai. A pretty good trick to remember this particular transformation is the Japanese word I, which means love, and it's simply spelled a-e, but it sounds exactly like the English sound I. When we want to represent the English sound ow, as in the word town or mouse, in the Japanese katakana system, we basically just change this to the 2 vowels a and u. So the word mouse will be changed to mausu. When we want to represent the English letter F in the Japanese katakana system, we basically use the letter fu because it is quite literally the only Japanese sound that resembles the letter F at all. So for an example, the word France will basically be changed to furansu. Notice that it's a pretty direct translation because you're only able to use that one character. But there is another tidbit of knowledge to know about translating the English letter F to Japanese. When the English letter F is succeeded by another vowel, such as in the word family, in Japanese katakana, when we represent those words, we do in fact still use the character fu to represent the letter F, but for the vowel that succeeds it in Japanese, we turn that into a small character. So the word family might be translated to family, like you would expect, but you do have to notice that unlike you might have guessed, the letter A is actually a small version letter instead of a normal length and width letter. In Japanese, there's absolutely no sound that exactly replicates the sound of the English letter L. So when we're using katakana, we use the R letter to substitute for R letters in English, but also for the L sound in English and L letters in English. So a pretty straightforward example of that would be the word cola. In Japanese, instead of pronouncing the la sound, which is just non-existent in the sound structure, we change that to the ra sound. So when we use cola and we turn that into Japanese, we simply get kora. So in English, the sound ta, as derived from the spelling of th, is pretty common in words such as this or that or thank you. But of course, in the last video, we learned that there's no consonant in Japanese other than the letter N that stands alone without a vowel that succeeds it. So in Japanese, when we want to represent the ta sound, we either use the letter S or the letter Z. Perhaps the most obvious example of this is the English word thank you. When translated into Japanese, we change the th sound into sa. So in Japanese, thank you is sankyu. Another example of this is the word mother, and this time instead of changing the th into the s sound, we're gonna change it to the z sound. So mother in Japanese katakana will be maza. However, there are some pretty rare cases where the th sound will be represented by the t letter in Japanese as well, just without the h, of course. The English word aesthetic, which is also one of my favorite words in English. This one's actually a pretty hard word to pronounce in Japanese katakana, and so it's a prime example for that scenario I mentioned earlier about how people who are native English speakers and are more used to pronouncing it the English way will have more trouble with katakana than they might even have with, say, kanji or something else. So for the English word aesthetic, we change that to the Japanese katakana version of itself and we pronounce it esutetiku. Of course, it sounds vagrantly different from the traditional pronunciation in English, and it's also pretty tricky in the spelling in that the te sound appears right after it appears the first time. So we have two tes in a row, and I don't know. I guess that's an example of one of the nuances in katakana that are more challenging towards your intuition or whatever, but it's good that we covered such an example, so consider yourself enlightened. So again, we come across one of the issues that has arisen because of how the Japanese sound structure changes the pronunciation of characters that would otherwise be pronounced differently. For example, in Japanese, we don't have characters that represent the she, the je, and the che sound. So when we face English words that have these sounds in them, such as the word cherry, we have to do a roundabout way of pronouncing them in Japanese. In these scenarios, we still use the characters that would have otherwise represented those sounds, but don't because they have been changed. But instead of using these characters solely by themselves, we simply add the e vowel in a small form right after them. So for example, the word cherry will in fact use the chi sound even though in English it's pronounced che, but we'll add that small e or e after the chi sound so that we can emulate that pronunciation. So the English word cherry will be changed in its Japanese katakana version into chieri. Now we've gotten to one of the harder to distinguish transformations in that in the English language, sometimes even though devoid of the proper spelling, some words will sound like the Japanese sounds that use the ya, you, and yo add-ons such as kya, sha, shu, sho, kyo. It's really quite hard to tell which of the words to apply this method to because sometimes they even verge onto the other guidelines that we've covered or will cover. And for the most part, I think mastering this part of katakana transitions will mostly just be a matter of experience and witnessing the pronunciation of these words by first-hand experience or first-ear experience. So again, probably the most well-encountered example of this particular method is the word shower. In English, when we pronounce the word shower, there's a complete lack of the letter Y. But in Japanese, believe it or not, when we change it to the katakana version, it's gonna have that ya sound. So shower will be changed to the Japanese pronunciation shawa. Another example of this is the word cash, in which it's changed to kyashu. And yeah, it's pretty unprecedented, but you should be able to get used to it once you encounter each. When we want to represent the English letter V in Japanese, we usually just use the letter B instead. So for example, the English word vegetable will be changed to its Japanese pronunciation vegetaboru. But here's where things get kind of freaky deaky, in that there are some Japanese who want to make a clear-cut distinction between the letter V and the letter B. And to do this, they've gone about and made a really strange addition to the katakana character syllabary, in that they've given the vowel U or U the dakuten, or the quotation mark like signs, in order to change it into a V sounding character. And it is an extra dosage of strange, because this character could be argued to be the only character other than N to be a consonant but not have a vowel succeeding it. So when you use this in katakana translations, you have to succeed it by a smaller version of the vowel that is needed to form the word that you're translating. So for our example, we're going to use the word violin, and we can translate this to the Japanese katakana version by changing the V sound into a B and getting violin. Or we could do the more unorthodox method perhaps, and use the V sound in Japanese as well, in which we use the V letter and then we precede it by a small A character to emulate that va sound, which would otherwise be ba in the regular translating of it. So we get the word violin. So then what we have instead is violin. So what we have instead is the pronunciation violin. So now we encounter another discrepancy resulting from, of course, the sound structure of Japanese differing from the sound structure of the English language, in that for the letter Y, we only have the three pronunciations ya, you, and yo. So when we try to translate the English sound ye into Japanese, we have to, of course, make some alterations. And surprisingly, what this does to the translation of the ye sound is that in Japanese, we don't use the letter Y at all. We use instead the two vowels E and E, in that the E is a normal sized character and the following E is a small letter. So for example, we'll be using the pretty common word yellow. When we translate that to Japanese, it's going to be iero. Another deficiency that we've come across is, of course, the Japanese letter W, in that it only has a matching character with the vowel A, as in wa. And there is, of course, no woo or we or wo. That one in itself is pronounced o instead. So what do we do when we're trying to translate English sounds such as those we, wo, woo into the Japanese language? Well, again, we don't use the W letter at all in those forms. We represent it with the vowel U, and again, we succeed it with the respective vowel of the word we're trying to translate it, but we use that vowel in a small letter form. So for the word water, we're gonna translate that into the Japanese katakana version, and it's gonna be uwata. Notice that it's kind of tricky because we use the vowel U in the beginning, but we succeed it by the vowel O instead of the vowel A, as you would expect from the English origin. In the last video, in which we predominantly covered hiragana, we also had a little tidbit about long consonants. And what we said in that video was that long consonants are represented by a small su character preceding the consonant that is in fact long or emphasized. Well, in katakana, we represent it the same way. Of course, the small su is written differently because it's a different writing syllabary, but it is there and it's before the consonant, just like we aforementioned. So what that has to do with translating English words into katakana Japanese version of those words is that in English, the sound structure of some words will give the last syllable a kind of feeling of finality, so to speak, in that the ending syllable will kind of have a sharp or clipped sound to it. It's really quite hard to distinguish this even if you are a native speaker, and perhaps it is the lens of Japanese speakers hearing English words that gives them the more comfortable or natural intuition of when this occurs. So again, this is one of those things that you shouldn't feel too paranoid about mastering right away. What we do need to know is that we represent these sounds with the long consonant being that last letter or character. So for example, the English word bed, which has that kind of rough ending syllable that gives you that duh sound at the end, we're going to translate that to the Japanese katakana version, and it's going to be bedo. And it's going to have that small su right before the do sound to represent that, well, what we mentioned earlier, that strong sound. So while this is an established method in the Japanese katakana system, there are words of this category that could actually be equally represented without the small su or the long consonant sound. Maybe it's just because it's that hard of a thing to differentiate. So our example of such a word is the word web, in that you can pronounce the word web with that small su to symbolize the bu as a long consonant, or you could simply pronounce it as webu. When we want to represent the English sound as in, well, America, we represent that in the Japanese katakana system as a regular a, or the letter A in Japanese. So America in English will be transformed to America. However, there is a special case to this as well, in that when the spelling of the sound is spelled with an O in English, as in the word, say, computer, in Japanese, we equally represent it with the letter U, or the sounding of it O. So it will be, instead of computer, it will be computer. When we want to change an English word into its katakana version, and at any point in the word we have a vowel that is succeeded by the letter R, then we turn that vowel into a long version of itself. A pretty common word that does this is, of course, the word girlfriend in English. When translated into its Japanese katakana version, it turns into garufrendo. So as we learned from the last video, in the Japanese sound structure, when we have the T and the I together, it turns into chi. When we have the letters D and I together, it turns into G. And when we have the letters T and U together, it turns into su. Unsurprisingly, this reflects into the method in which we change English words into their Japanese katakana versions. For example, the word ticket, even though it has the T-I sound, we're not going to pronounce it that way. We're going to instead use the ch sound. So the word ticket will transform into the pronunciation chiketto. Similarly, the English word radio will be transformed into regio. However, there has been somewhat of an uprising to this method, in that a lot of Japanese speakers would prefer to more faithfully represent those English sounds by actually pronouncing something more similar to the T and the D sounds. So in this case, they have instead used the method of taking the sounds te and de and succeeding that with a small E letter. One of the common words that this form appears is the English word tea. When we use this method to transform the word tea into its Japanese katakana version, it does sound a lot more similar to its original form. Another common word that this occurs in is the English word party, which in its katakana version is pronounced party. Another relatively new amendment to this method that we can mention is how Japanese speakers have begun to more faithfully represent the sound tu. In this approach, instead of simply using su instead of tu, Japanese speakers have begun to use the letter to and succeeding it with a small version of the vowel u. In contrast to the aforementioned amendments to this method, this particularly one hasn't catched on quite as much. So although it is more accurate in a sense, be wary in using it affirmatively in situations where some people might not recognize the transformation. So those are the guidelines for representing English words in Japanese with the use of the katakana system. Just from filming those more than 15 rules, I can say that it is kind of a lot to grasp and definitely a mouthful. But believe it or not, the other thing that katakana is used for, the automatopoeias, I'm very much inclined to say that those are a lot trickier to comprehend, although they aren't quite as important. It is definitely a much more established system of use in the Japanese language than it is in the English language, and we might just make a whole video devoted to that sometime in the future, but for now, that's katakana, and we are gonna move on to the next load of introductory material. So thanks for watching again, and look forward to lesson 3.